All right, guys, welcome back to the Existential Lounge. Today, we got a bit of a spicy one.
We do.
So I'm going to preface it with we're going to circle back and do the other side as well. But today's episode is going to be looking at the best academic arguments for the existence of a god and doing our best with our limited knowledge in trying to, I'll put air quotes because I'm not trying to be incendiary, but like debunk the arguments. And like I said, next week we're going to come right back and try to do this for atheist arguments. So we're going to look at the best academic atheist arguments and try to debunk them using as much logic as we can.
Yeah, we just want to be as balanced as possible.
Right.
You know, have both sides. It's fair. It's just
while
fair.
we've like multiple times on this channel already talked about, we both don't believe that there is a deity, there is no God. It doesn't make sense to us. But if you fall too much into the idea that, atheism is correct, it starts to become just as dogmatic as what we're criticizing.
100%.
So not only is this an effort to be neutral and fair to both sides, but also to keep ourselves academically honest.
Exactly.
So with that being said, long intro short, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
We're starting with the
Moral argument. Yes.
So you want to go ahead and tell us what that is?
Yeah, so essentially it just goes into the idea that morality comes from somewhere. We all have it. And there are specific moral concepts that have transcended through time. Right, since the beginning of humans, we've had this feeling, for instance, that like killing babies or killing each other, stealing, it feels intuitively wrong. And so the moral argument goes into saying that like that comes from somewhere. It must have been imbued within humanity from an external source. And that has to be God, is what the moral argument essentially
states. So
states.
I think the best the best point that this argument, the best premise it puts forth is that it wants to say, or it's pointing to an observable truth. For some reason, cultures, societies that should have never been in contact with each other seem to have consistent ideas of what is morally okay to do.
Yeah.
And if we're going to say that that's by chance, that seems a little disingenuous, right?
Correct.
Like, just by chance, everybody seems to think that abusing the elderly is wrong. Everybody seems to think that taking advantage of children is wrong. Everybody seems to think that killing is wrong. All these different things that are consistent across cultures. And we're not talking like culture a few miles down the road. We're saying
Across the globe.
Egyptian culture had a lot of similarities to cultures in Mesoamerica. So, I mean, maybe that wasn't the best example to use because Mesoamerican cultures did human sacrifice. But you get my point. They didn't kill their own. They did. But it seems that some things were consistent across these different people.
Yes. Yeah.
And
for the most part, yeah.
For the most part. The first point I want to bring up against this, though, is that it fails to realize that morality has changed. So if morality was an objective truth that was imbued upon all of us by a deity, then it would stay consistent, right? Because if an all-knowing, all-powerful, all other facets being set a rule of morality, then it would have to remain consistent. But it seems that as time goes on, the social concept and the social standard of what is morally okay to do seems to go back and forth, up and down, left and right. So, for example, the first one I want to look at here is the idea of gay marriage. Gay marriage is something that was not okay at a certain point. Societally speaking, it was ostracized. Now, for the most part, barring a few people, most people think it's more of a just be and let be.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be our problem what other people do in their bedroom. So how can a objective morality coming from an objective being that knows all change, right?
Yeah, it seems that because essentially what it's arguing, correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a part of our biology, essentially. These
biology. So that's the thing, which
Well, what I was going to get into real fast, correct me again if I'm misspeaking, but that these moral concepts are baked into the cake of our being. Like, so they're one
So
with us essentially.
that's more accurate because
Yeah, that's what
they're not.
that's what I'm meaning
The
to say.
idea is that what they're trying to say is that it transcends biology.
Yeah.
There is something in us that makes us want to act outside of our animal instincts, which is what separates us from the
Yeah.
rest of the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
And the religious argument is that that thing that seems to be inside of us is the soul.
Yeah.
It's not biology. It's
Okay.
what God imbued into this thing that made it human.
I see that. So it's, to be more accurate, would be the metaphysical interaction of morality within our biology.
It's not within our biology. It's separate because that's the separation that, at least I'm speaking in more of a Judeo-Christian sense, but the idea is that the flesh and the soul are different.
Okay, true.
I'm starting to sound very theologian here, but that's their argument, is that today's world has become way too materialistic and we've given too much into the flesh, which is the way of the animal kingdom, not the way of the human.
Yeah.
The human is made in the image and likeness of God, and therefore it has the ability to rationalize because it has a soul, as opposed to just giving into fleshly desires.
Yeah.
And that soul is where morality
So it's saying that
is.
these moral things are exclusively within, not within our own even minds. It's just in the soul that exists
soul.
within us. So I guess I misspoke there. So it's still changing, though. The soul is changing. I don't know.
And that's what I think the argument against this would be, is that
Yeah.
if he caked into us a soul with a strict morality code,
Yeah.
how is it that we've been able to change it? And that was just one example, and maybe, like I said, a lot of religious fundamentalists today will still agree with that more traditional view of morality when it regards to gay marriage. But like, there's other things that most people won't agree with. For example, like wearing denim is prohibited in the Bible. That's a thing in morality that we've changed because it just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
But like, that should technically be something that was imbued into our morality, our soul, by the Almighty Creator. Why was that a thing that can change?
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't make sense that it should. They should be absolutes, consistent things that just don't change over time, regardless of any factors. But they do, and clearly, and countless examples of them, repeatedly just keep doing that.
And I think something we can look at, like an analogy, at least for me, usually helps me see more broad concepts in a simpler way. What are things that do have creators? I'm just picking from stuff in this room. There's a TV behind you guys right now. That TV has a creator. We know for a fact that was made by someone, right? He put specific things in that TV. He had the power to put what he wanted into that TV. As long as this TV continues to be, the stuff that's inside of it doesn't change.
Yeah.
Those stuff will remain the same because the thing that put it in there dictated what would be in there.
Yeah.
Likewise, if we are created in the likeness and the image of God and he imbued in us a moral code,
Yeah.
that would not change. It doesn't make sense that it can change, right?
I guess, I mean, I don't know if the conversation would go to Adam eating from the tree, and
Yeah, so that's the fall of man. And again,
Yeah.
I'm heavily leaning into Judeo-Christian because while I am atheist, I was born into a Catholic household and I am pretty versed in Christian scripture. So yeah, that's the fall of man. That's we're failed creatures. All of us will fail to be.
But I guess that would be
the glory of God.
Yeah, that would be like the almost overriding of the soul and kind of having that
Exactly.
the
Which is
otherness.
still logically inconsistent, what you're about to lean into is a whole argument we're going to have later on.
Yeah.
But yes, to just lightly touch on it before we dive deep later, that still doesn't help the idea of an almighty, all-powerful creator, because if he imbued within us an ability to change his plan, then he's not almighty.
Yeah.
It just can't make sense.
Yeah.
Now, outside of just picking holes in these arguments, I think that something we can do to, again, just continue to strive for that intellectual honesty is to find alternative explanations for the premises that these arguments set forth.
100%.
So we've spoken about this book before, and I think that it's the best example for the explanation of morality that we've had, at least that I can think of.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we've got some Aristotelian ethics in there, and that's like super fundamental, but as it regards specifically to morals, Sam Harris's The Moral Landscape touches on how morality exists, why it exists, and also explains why there's that phenomena that seems to dictate that we have consistent moral principles across cultures.
Yeah, and these moral intuitions have developed from exposure and circumstance, and just like how animals develop their intuitions and act in particular patterns that we can see, like a certain polar bears will act in a certain way, whether they're born of this family or in a whole other distance away, or fish or monkeys, whatever it may be. They all have these similarities in the same way that we as humans do as well, with our moral intuitions. So yeah, we would.
So-
A lot of that just comes from nature and our exposures and how we as humans have.
So I wouldn't say it comes from nature necessarily, unless we're going to say that biology is nature. But
Yeah,
I think it's imbued in our biology, and I think you touched on it most when you said that other animals seem to have also what we can somewhat title a moral code that seems to be consistent amongst different prides of lions, different I can't think, school of fish. Maybe not fish. Fish are very rudimentary.
the patterns they
life form.
move, but yeah,
Well, no, because we're talking specifically about their morality here.
yeah.
So,
Elephants.
Elephants, dolphins,
Yeah.
all these different things have what seems to be consistent ideas of how they maneuver moral issues.
Yeah,
And the explanation that both Sam Harris and I would also agree with him is that old Jeff Goldblum quote. It always goes back to it, but
Life finds a
a
way.
way.
Yeah.
So biologically, it's baked into organisms, all of them. So this isn't a thing that like religion would like to say is only going to humans, but organisms are hardwired to find the way that it can survive the longest.
Yeah.
What is most beneficial for this organism to reproduce and continue for this species to flourish?
yeah, and not having this intrinsic desire to just murder your relatives is
Exactly.
going to help
So-
the society flourish.
Right.
Go ahead.
If we look at the specific things that the moral argument is trying to say are consistent amongst different cultures of humanity, we can also explain why those things are there and how they are explained through natural selection. So humans aren't the strongest or the fastest animal out there. We survived in our early stages because one, we were able to make tools, and two, we stayed together in packs.
Yeah.
So why would the species evolve to want to kill others of its kind if its survival is predicated on numbers?
Yeah. Working together.
It doesn't make sense.
Exactly.
So of course, through natural selection, we developed an intuition to not want to kill the other ones.
Yeah.
Likewise, how do you continue to have more humans? Obviously, reproduction. How do you ensure more reproduction? More of the species. So why would you want to kill more of the species if that would lead to less likely amount of offspring coming about? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why would we want to harm the children if those are what will continue
future.
the future of this species? These are all things that seem to be heavenly consistent at face value, but when you just dive a little deeper and look at the biology of animals, it's a thing that's just consistent amongst most animals, and it's
Yeah.
because, again, that Jeff Goldblum line, life finds a way.
Yeah. And they act very similarly. Even animals that, obviously not human, but
Yeah.
there are patterns of these social behaviors that elephants in their social systems cooperate very well. They're not constantly hurting each other
Yeah.
or, doing what we would view as crimes in like an elephant world. And that relates really well into our lives, and
Yeah.
we can see these.
We can see the consistencies among so many different things.
Yeah.
Even the idea of wanting your offsprings to be the one to continue, how male lions will kill the male cubs of the previous pride head if they
Yeah.
take over a pride.
Yeah.
Like, these things are consistent because, again, it just seems that the species wants to continue its genetic line.
Correct. It's kind of like some people or a lot of people would relate where, being with someone who already has kids, like you can have less of a connection sometimes
Yeah.
to that kid rather than your own DNA. And
Yeah.
how, that inclination comes from that, where we desire our own DNA to prosper.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah.
I think closing out this whole argument section, I would say that why should we trust our moral intuitions as moral truths rather than evolved behavioral impulses?
Yeah.
Things like even birds migrating.
Yeah.
It seems reductive that we would call bird migrations instinct and then want to look at our instincts and give them this grandiose title of objective morality.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we're quick to say we're more complicated in those ways, and that's just not in intuition or how we're supposed to be, and just more complicated ways of being. But yeah, those boil down to instinct.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
yeah,
behaviorally learned instincts so that the species continues to exist.
yeah, and you can see these things amongst even children. Kids at extremely young ages, before that they can even speak, the tendency to want to share.
Yeah.
Like you can see that before it's even taught to want to share.
So again, just to play devil's advocate there, the religious person will say because that child already has been imbued with God's moral objectivity.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, that goes into like in large populations, like sharing is super useful to like sharing food or resources, and how that just helps with the flourishing of a species.
And
But yeah.
this one just popped in my head. And we've been talking about the consistencies in morality amongst cultures and how those seem to point to some deity baking morality into our psyche. But this argument seems to ignore the radical differences as well. There are extreme differences in moral
Truths amongst different civilizations,
cultures.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't. You don't even have to travel too far. Just
No.
look at the Judeo-Islamic Christian religions and look at the differences in the household dynamics in marriage between New Testament Christianity and Islam, for instance.
Yeah.
Dramatically different.
Yeah.
So clearly there are different moral truths amongst cultures.
Yeah. Even amongst the same religion, just denominations of it.
Yeah, 100%.
Orthodox, Jewish people versus like Reform, not tending to kosher food and all that.
Electronics on the Sabbath.
Yeah, correct. But yeah, it varies greatly. And if it were a part of our soul, that which is the kind of guiding light of all of our actions, it would kind of maintain itself, it seems.
Yeah, 100%.
But yeah, we
right.
should go into that next one, the cosmological argument.
Yeah, the good old cause argument.
I think this is the one that I was saying. I feel like I totally understand. It makes sense. It kind of goes into the watch without a watchmaker. But essentially, the explanation is whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. In conclusion, the universe has a cause. So therefore, God did it.
Right. So I think what you were saying about the watch without a watchmaker idea is more pertinent to the fine-tuning argument. This one is more so saying that the infinite regress of dominoes cannot go on forever. Everything that we observe in the known universe has a cause. Therefore, the universe itself must have a cause.
Well, yeah, but in the same way, like if there's just a watch, someone had to make it because something caused that.
Right,
And
but
like
the
the universe is
argument
a known.
more again that the watch was put together in such a way that it will tell time perfectly. That's fine tuning.
I think it could work with both ways, no? Because
Yes, but I could see how you're applying it, but generally the watchmaker argument is used for fine tuning.
okay, I didn't know that. But okay. But yeah, go ahead with what you were about to explain.
So yeah, essentially it's saying that whatever begins to exist has a cause because everything we observe that has started to exist and continues to exist was set into motion by something else.
Yeah.
The universe began to exist.
Yeah.
Therefore, the universe must have a cause, and then it jumps to saying that that cause must be God because it has to be something that exists outside of this universe.
Yeah, something
because something within
did
this
it.
universe can't start this universe, and the only thing that can exist outside of the known universe, outside of the universe in total, actually,
Yeah.
must be an all-powerful being.
Correct.
So that is the argument that they try to make.
Yeah.
So I think this is where we get into the whole thing I was touching on earlier, that this is a huge God of the Gaps issue.
Yeah, because we don't know how everything began, and
Right.
it could just be infinite regression. It could have just, who knows? It could have just be something that just keeps repeating
Right,
itself.
and I'm not even presuming to know or even give hypotheticals of what
Yeah,
could
we
be
have
the
no
cause.
idea.
What I'm saying is that we clearly have an I don't know here.
Yeah,
There is a hole, a gap of knowledge. There is this whole thing we know, and then within that thing we know, there's little holes of things we don't know.
Yeah.
And it's hard to piece this big old puzzle together.
yeah,
Religion seems to always want to leap to grab that hole, or I'm sorry, fill that hole with whichever god they ascribe to.
yeah.
And that's the issue with the god of the gaps argument, is that we've seen in the past when because inevitably these gaps of knowledge will shrink with the better understanding we have of the natural world, so does the power of your god. So if we are to be logically consistent and logically ethical here, we need to assume that eventually these gaps will continue to close. I am
As we find answers, yeah.
Exactly. I am willing here. I am sitting and telling you and claiming ignorance as to what caused the universe. We do not know.
Yeah.
But I forget whose quote this is. It honestly might be Exerbia. Really cool channel if you guys want to check it out. But I'd rather have questions I can't answer than answers I cannot question.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's we have this thing. I have the humility here to say I don't know to what caused the universe. It seems that religion would leap to the idea of filling in these gaps of knowledge with their God. And we have examples of this. Historically, this has been done over and over, and each time that they do it, every time that we get better with our understanding of the universe, we close the gap in what they were trying to fill in with God.
Poseidon with the tides, we learned that like the moon's gravitational force has an influence on how that moves.
There was a gap in, so old Greek people were looking at the tides there in the Mediterranean Sea, and we're like,
Something's
why,
moving
why
it.
are they moving?
Yeah.
Why is it that every few weeks the tide's out there and then sometimes it's all the way up here?
Yeah.
There must be gods doing that.
It's just essentially like archaic science. It's just science without tools and just
I wouldn't
jumping
even
to
call
conclusions.
it archaic because I don't want to make it be reductive. It's science. I think that religion is early step science. It was
Yeah.
just it's the most fascinating thing in humanity, in my opinion, and it's our never-ending curiosity.
Yeah.
We had people, scientists out there looking at the world and wanting to make sense of it, and given the tools of their time, came to the conclusions that they did. That's what that was. I think that
Yeah.
religion is simply early step science.
Yeah, I mean that's what I meant by archaic, early,
Yeah.
just old science
And I
that
know,
we
yeah,
used
I
to
agree with you.
like rely on. But yeah, I guess without the tools that we have now, and you know, a lot of things that we will discover, those gaps, as you were saying, are just going to keep closing.
Yeah.
It only makes sense.
The Hindus believe that like earthquakes were caused by Shiva dancing.
Yeah.
Or that Sri Lanka is separated from mainland India because I might be wrong here. Hindus, let me know. But one of the gods didn't like the Sri Lankans, so they had to be separated from mainland India. They
Yeah, I
were
don't know.
bad people, something like that.
Okay. Well, I mean, a lot of them use that same, I guess, level of
But,
reasoning
like,
there.
They simply didn't have an understanding of like tectonic plates and
Yeah.
just the way that islands are formed,
Yeah.
rising and lowering of sea levels, which would, if I had to guess, at some point Sri Lanka was probably connected to mainland India.
Yeah. I just overall though, it is that leap where we don't know what caused everything. Let's not leap to the conclusion that some all-powerful great being
Right.
snapped his fingers and caused it to come into place. We have no idea. Who knows? Maybe science one day will answer that.
I don't think that there's a maybe there. That's maybe where my humility kind of falters. I don't think that maybe science will figure it out one day. I think I have enough faith in humanity that if we stick around long enough, if we don't self-destruct, these questions are going to be answered.
I just wonder if kind of like a crime scene how if enough things destroy the crime scene, that the more it's just muddled, that the more difficult it can be to solve it ever.
Yeah.
If pieces of evidence just disappear because of the way that maybe like time or radiation erodes something,
Right.
that like who knows if the answers could be how black holes or dark matter influence the state of the fabric of reality, and how some answers that like if we put this and this together would have given us the answers. You know, the universe is expanding. It's absolute chaos out there.
I mean, there are
I'm
a few
just
theories out there that I think make logical sense, and
Yeah.
maybe the more we follow them, the more that
no,
we
for
can
sure.
prove them to be
Yeah,
right.
but I'm just thinking like I don't know for certainty whether we'll find that answer. I wouldn't be surprised if we do, but I also wouldn't be surprised if somehow
I think if we don't, it's not a result of inability to do so. It's
Lack of
because-
technology.
Not even lack of technology. I think it's just because we blow ourselves out of existence.
that could happen.
I think anything that is out there to answer, humans will eventually figure it out if we just stick around long enough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I just hope that, you know, whatever those answers are dependent on, that they don't get somehow destroyed or altered in some way. You know what I mean?
I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
I have no idea how. I get that there are
Maybe
working
it's
theories
some,
right now,
like,
but
interstellar thing.
yeah. Who knows?
Start knocking behind the bookshelf.
Right.
All right. So next,
Yeah,
we're
go into the
hopping
next one.
into the ontological argument. So the ontological argument says this: it is possible for a maximally great being to exist. If it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then it exists in some possible world. And if he exists in some possible world, then he exists in every possible world, because if he is Maximus, like he's great in every way,
Yeah.
then he cannot be limited to only one world. And now if he exists in every possible world, then he is God, because it is the overarching all-powerful being that exists on all worlds.
Yeah. It's a huge leap because it like, even just assuming that it's true, just because it's possible doesn't mean it's a thing.
Right.
You know,
Now, before we even get into that, because I think that tackles the conclusion.
yeah.
I think this argument fails at every premise.
Yeah.
And I'd like to go step by step, starting with number one. It
Yeah.
is possible that a maximally great being exists. Your premise to start with is paradoxical.
Yeah.
So you've already failed your argument from the beginning, because you are making a non-falsifiable point as your first argument.
Yeah, and it's just paradoxical, the omnipotence paradox.
Exactly. That's what I was going to get into, is
Yeah.
that an omni being is paradoxical in nature. We're saying that a maximally great being exists. That's the first premise of the ontological argument. So it is saying that a omnitemporal, omniscient,
Omnibenevolent, yeah.
all the omnis exists. That's impossible, because that is the being that can that can move anything, but can create a rock he cannot move. Therefore, that being cannot logically exist.
Yeah.
Right. So
100%.
your argument falls on its face, because your first premise is impossible.
Yeah. The other one just saying that if it's possible that one even hypothetically does exist, that it exists in some possible world.
That's the next leap there that they're
Yeah.
taking. That makes no sense, because just because you can imagine something doesn't mean that it must of necessity exist on some possible world.
Yeah.
The authors of DC Comics and Action Comics thought up Superman. That doesn't mean that of necessity Superman exists on some world.
Yeah, I think number two goes into saying that if it's maximally great, that you can think of it, that being maximally truly great would mean that it exists externally also, not just you know, internally in the mind, but like
Right.
that it must also exist externally, and so it's existing in some world. It's just a leap. Like, why?
It is a very big leap. Yeah, that's what I was saying. That if we think of something, that doesn't mean that it must of necessity exist in the real world.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah.
The only premise that they have, which I think does have merit, is premise 3.
I mean, that does make logical sense.
Yes.
Like logical sense.
Exactly,
Yes.
but the way that you came to premise 3 was with faulty premise 1 and 2, so it still falls on its face. But just to touch on it, it says that if a maximally powerful being exists in any world, then he must of necessity exist in every world.
Yeah.
And yes, that logically tracks, because
Yeah, it makes sense.
If something is maximally great and it exists somewhere, he's maximally great, so he's not limited to that one place. So he must of necessity exist on all worlds.
Yeah.
And then premise 4 says, if he exists in every possible world, then he must exist in our world.
Yeah.
Which again also tracks, because if he exists everywhere, then he exists here. And then conclusion, therefore a maximally great being exists, God.
Yeah.
But we fall on the argument because premise 1 and 2 are paradoxical in nature. You cannot possibly have this. I mean, I touched on the immovable rock paradox, but there's multiple more. An omnitemporal and omniscient being cannot be surprised by the actions of humans. We touched on this a little earlier on the other argument that, but essentially, God is described, at least again in the Judeo-Christian faith, as being surprised by the actions of humans, being upset at what we do with the supposed free will.
Yeah, but he knew that it was all going to happen before we even existed.
If he is omnitemporal, then he knew that would happen.
Yeah.
An omnitemporal being cannot be surprised.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. You cannot possibly be surprised if you already knew what was coming, because by definition, to be surprised you didn't know what happened would happen.
Or demand anything of us. That also just doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
It's like, follow these commandments, but like, you either made us or did not make us to follow what you want us to. And you know before even creating us whether we'll do it or not.
Right. Then there's the omnipotence and omnibenevolence paradox.
Yeah.
He cannot be all powerful and all loving because bad exists in the world. If he is all powerful and all loving, then bad would not exist, but bad does exist. Now we're left with, is he all loving but can't remove all the bad, therefore he's not all powerful?
Yeah.
Are we with, he can remove the bad but he doesn't, now he's not all loving? So again, we cannot have a maximally powerful being, because maximally powerful includes both omnipotence and omnibenevolence. And we just explained how those two things cannot be in one being if we exist in a reality with bad.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that claim about how if he's all loving, then why is there evil? And if he doesn't erase the evil but is able, then he's not all loving. And if he's unable to do it, then he's not all powerful.
Exactly. And again, I will lend credence to what they would say, or at least play devil's advocate, I'll say, is that is a result of free will that he gave humans.
Yeah.
He gave us the ability for free will. But still, he must have, of necessity, because of his omnitemporal nature, known that our free will would have led to these bads, so he is still ultimately responsible for the bad that exists.
Yeah. Yeah. Pascal's wager. Yeah, this one's rough. Because this goes into, there's two possibilities. Either you believe in God or don't. Mm-hmm. And there's two possibilities also, that he exists or doesn't exist. And the conclusion is that you're forced to choose. And the safer option is to believe he exists, because you are infinitely rewarded that if that happens to be the case. If he exists and you didn't believe, you are infinitely punished. Thus, it is safer to bet on him existing than not, because either nothing happens or you are infinitely rewarded.
Right. So essentially, they're saying God exists or he doesn't.
Yeah.
We can't answer that for certain. We can all theorize one way or the other, but we don't know. What we do know is that he does or he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Now, with that truth, the fact that there is that dichotomy in existence, we have the option to believe or not to believe in him.
Yeah.
Pascal says the better and safer option is to believe in him, because if you live your life believing in him and he doesn't exist, you've lost nothing, and you're, by all accounts, a fairly decent person. Yeah. If you follow most religious scripture to the T, you'll be a fairly decent person. So you lived a life, you were a good person, and at the end, he wasn't real, but you lost nothing. And now, if you don't believe in him and he is real, now you reach the end line and you go into hell. So why would you have taken that wager? That wager seems like it's set up for you to lose, right?
Yeah, it's like they're justifying that the sacrifice of choosing to believe in a religion, whether or not you know the truth of it, that when you die and if there happens to be hell, it's so much safer to believe in God, because heaven, you're infinitely rewarded than an infinite just damnation in hell, burning alive.
Exactly.
But so let's go into like the specific areas where,
So I think it fails on premise one again.
yeah,
From
which God?
Yeah, exactly. He
Yeah.
says there's two options: God exists or He doesn't. What He doesn't tell you is that those two options exist for millions of gods.
Imagine like there is actually like a God, but the actual religion that it's supposed to like be a part of just was never even made. Like,
Or maybe it died off and it's one of those forgotten civilizations
yeah,
we
right.
don't know. And that was the true one, and now we're all just
Yeah, I'm just doing the
down.
fantasy ones. But yeah, so it doesn't say which god. So imagine, I mean, with all the religions out there and all the different gods that exist, like you're making a wager on so many, and not knowing whether it's the right one. So we you said that thing earlier about how it's actually just like playing the odds are the same and not believing in any, then choosing one of them, because it may not be the case that there is a God, but it
Right.
also just the chances that you choose the wrong one are super high.
Exactly. So the reality is that he is oversimplifying the wager he's asking you to take. He's saying that your wager is a 50-50 when it is not.
No.
It's not even close to that.
I wonder why he thought that. That seems like a super big flaw in that argument that like I'm surprised he just didn't think about.
So I would assume that it's just that Judeo-Christian centrism.
Yeah, he's just
Where-
super religious.
Yeah, where I honestly I don't even know if Pascal was super religious. I mean, I'm guessing he was, but I think that there's just in a lot of Western philosophy and Western thought, it seems to exclude the fact that things exist east of like Romania. Everything out that way doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so when he was thinking of this argument, I bet he thought he like put down a banger, because in his mind he was only thinking of this argument regarding the Judeo-Christian God.
Yeah.
I don't think he even took into account those other ones.
Yeah.
But in reality, you have as much of a chance of going to hell by choosing the wrong one than by just choosing none.
Yeah.
Now, the second one is more of a philosophical argument, right? It's more of a like less concrete, less like very sciencey by the numbers argument, and more of a epistemological. Does that apply? I think so.
I think so.
Can you choose what you believe?
No. Yeah, because if we right now were to try to convince ourselves the Earth's flat, or actually not humans, we're giraffes convincing ourselves we're humans, like you can't convince yourself of that truth, or that you're not who you say you are.
Exactly.
So we don't really have power over that. We can be brainwashed, for instance. We can be shown enough data that then convinces us, but that's through external influence and through enough of it as well. But we can't just convince ourselves at the drop of a hat with whatever we want to just believe anything that we want is true. It'd be super difficult.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Just on what you were touching is that idea that you can't choose what you believe, because he's essentially telling you believe this because it will be better for you in the long run, but you're essentially just practicing self-deceit. You're telling yourself, I believe this because it might be beneficial for me in the long run, but you never actually internalize and believe the ideas. And that extends into my next point, that God would see past that, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Because he sees the intentionality behind why you're doing anything. And if he saw that this all began with you desperately convincing yourself for the sake of saving yourself, wait, I have a question. Even if you do successfully convince yourself, would he go to the intentionality that first started it all and was like, wait, you did this with like a false like desire, and so even if you did successfully convince yourself, you did it originally with false intentions.
Yeah.
And so you're screwed either way.
I mean, it's there for you in the scripture. Samuel 16:7, the Lord does not see as the man, for the man judges the outward, while God judges the heart.
Yeah.
That's you can't. Pascal's wager goes against the very scripture that he's trying to justify.
Yeah.
He's telling you to believe because it's better for you.
Yeah.
Whereas God's not judging that you believed in self-interest. He's judging that you actually gave your heart. If he exists, he's judging that you gave your heart to him.
Yeah.
So when the time of judgment comes, those who believed in him for self-preservation wouldn't enter the pearly gates.
Yeah, correct. I think another thing that the wager kind of doesn't gloss over well is the fact that you're essentially sacrificing your entire existence, your one shot at life that we know of, and you're dedicating it to configuring your conception of reality in your daily practices and how you behave in the world in accordance with said religion. And well, it doesn't say what God or what religion either.
I mean, we know he's talking about the Judeo-Christian one.
Yeah. But it's that's a big sacrifice, and that's a big thing that's going to take a toll on what you're doing. And I think even like mental health is that if you're to dedicate all of that into put all those resources into doing those things, that's going to be awful for the person.
Yeah,
if they don't want to and they're just doing it out of
what I wrote here. It might sound dramatic, but I don't think it is. Is that I see that as a wasted existence.
Yeah.
To live your life constantly practicing self-deceit is not an injustice to your surroundings, not only an injustice to your family, not only an injustice to your society, but you're living in a constant injustice to yourself. You're lying to yourself on a regular basis.
It's disrespect, it's self-disrespect.
It's self-disrespect to the highest degree.
Yeah.
Just think about when you promise yourself you're going to reach some goal and then you don't. Think about how self-damning that feels a lot of the time. At least it does for me. If I tell myself I'm going to do something and I don't succeed in that thing, I feel terrible. I feel like I'm a failure because I've let myself down. I haven't even let the people around me down. I let me down.
Yeah.
So imagine living an entire existence constantly doing that to yourself.
Yeah. Assuming that it's like a 50-50 even.
Right. And again, this last part that I just went on was more of a subjective argument against Pascal's wager because I understand it's not a real objective argument, but more so just why me personally, I could not believe in God because of Pascal's wager.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with that. I think that there's so much that goes into it. It's not just the ideological convincing, but it's like the practices that go along with it. You're going to have to assume the posture of a being that is involved in that religion. It's not just believing, it's practicing. That requires daily, weekly, habitual, practices and gatherings and reading and all sorts of things that you have to be a part of this ideology.
Right.
But yeah, it's just a lot.
All right, so next we're going to be moving on to the fine-tuning argument. This is your watchmaker one.
Yeah.
So this one essentially says there's various elements of reality that exist in such a way that it necessitates life. So essentially it's saying the conditions of the universe seem to be fine-tuned so perfectly, so exact, so that we are possible. It says that because of that, it must of logical necessity mean that there is a creator who fine-tuned this universe for our existence.
Yeah. Yeah, it disregards the fact that there's so much of life that also just is damaging to us and is hostile to the development of life. I mean, you look at so many different every area of our solar system, literally, besides Earth, that is just barren because they were just this much further away from the sun, or this too close to it, or whatever it may be. You could make the argument that elements have to be pretty specific for life to develop, and within the chaos of reality, it can be difficult, or the odds of that happening are small in the grand scheme.
And if anything, that's what they're saying. They're saying that the odds of us existing is so small, so inconceivable, that it must have had happened by design.
Yeah.
And the argument against that is that, no, it's not that we happened by design, is that the universe is so incredibly vast, so ridiculously big
Yeah.
that mathematically it makes sense that there's a place we exist.
Yeah.
Because so many factors happen on every single planet that eventually you are going to land on the one that is this one. We
Yeah.
just happen to be the species that lives here at that time. So I think that's called the anthropic principle. It's the idea that uh, we're looking at the universe being fine-tuned because we exist. So we're looking, we essentially have inherent confirmation bias here. We exist, therefore the universe exists for us.
Yeah.
We're looking at the things backward as opposed to how they actually transpired.
Yeah.
The things didn't transpire in a 10 to 1 pattern. They went from 1 to 10. We just happened to be what came out as a result of the stuff that happened. The stuff that happened wasn't made for us. We were just the random byproduct of the stuff that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
And it presupposes that the universe, again, is for humans. Like I was touching on earlier, the mere number, this is the known universe, which, by the way, from what every science we have, the estimation is that this thing is infinite. But from the known universe, the observable universe, there are 10 sextillion planets in the known universe.
Yeah. There's going to be life on one of those, especially given that so many of those have suns and they're orbiting those, you know? And so they're going to have chances of life given all of those numbers.
Exactly.
It's just that it's too high.
And this one will tickle your fancy. Probably more than one.
More than one what?
More than one place where life could.
Oh,
develop.
yeah. There's definitely other life
Inside
forms.
joke, but I'll let you
Mathematically,
guys in
yeah.
it. Brandon loves aliens.
I do.
Brandon
do.
wants aliens to be real
So bad. Yeah, just mathematically they're a thing. Who knows if they've come here or not, but yeah, the odds of them existing are just super huge. And I mean, with all of those planets and solar systems, and it just the correct circumstances for life are abundant throughout the universe.
So
they're
the odds
abundant.
that the perfect conditions
Happen
for
somewhere?
carbon-based life happen in one place is less likely than it happening on multiple places.
Yeah.
Given that there's 10 sextillion in the known universe alone.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I can't even conceive of that number.
You know what? I don't know off the top of my head. How many zeros is 10 sextillion?
Let's see. I'm curious.
22 zeros.
It's a lot. 10. It's 10 followed by 21 more zeros. It's a lot of zeros.
That's insane. That's insane. If you guys think that we're the only ones, you're not thinking enough.
Yeah.
And now I wanted to also touch on the idea, because the fine-tuning argument wants to say that these things were fine-tuned for us, right? That they were essentially drawn up this way by the almighty creator so that we can exist. But going back to the God of the gaps argument, there's gaps in our understanding of how things work, right? And we like to fill that in with God. For example, saying that he fine-tuned gravity so that we stick on this planet perfectly, that's just not the case, and we can prove that now. Gravity is not something that was just arbitrarily chosen out of a hat so that it helps humans exist better and create an atmosphere and all that.
Yeah.
Gravity works like the idea of like pulling a really long bed sheet, dropping a bowling ball in the middle, and then dropping marbles around it. Those marbles will fall towards
it.
the thing.
Yeah.
That's the way that the fabric of space and time works. The fabric of space and time, from our understanding, is flat. And then masses like planets, like stars, like all these different celestial bodies, they create deformations in that fabric of space and time, making the things around it that are smaller, that can't make as big of divots in that fabric, come towards
Adhere
it.
to that, yeah.
So by knowing that, then we can mathematically compute how much each thing is going to have its gravitational pull based on the mass that it will affect the fabric of space and time, right?
Yeah.
So gravity isn't some arbitrarily picked out of a hat thing that a deity did so that we can exist perfectly. It's the result of the elements of the universe.
Yeah.
And that's just one example. Like, we can go on and on and on about these different universal constants that exist that at face value, sure, could seem like they're perfectly drawn up for us, but they're not. They're just a result of the inherent reality. Like, they're predicated on the structure of the universe. They're not predicated on whatever decided to just give it a number saying, I mean, I don't know what the gravitational constant is off the top of my head, excuse me, but like, say it's 24. Probably nothing like that, but God didn't just say 24 because it would help humans.
Yeah.
No, it's 24 because the structure of the universe dictates that it will be 24.
Yeah. And tons of things happen naturally to like absolutely annihilate life. You know, disease, there's natural disaster, there's ice ages, there's all sorts of things. I mean, a human goes out into space and no living organism without protection other than what, those little tardigrade things, water bears, can survive the vacuum of space. So, I mean,
I think there's an equal argument to be made that the universe is fine-tuned for life to not exist than there is for it to exist.
Yeah, there is. 100%
well,
equal.
I don't think either one is true. I don't think the universe is fine-tuned for us in either positive or negative. I think the universe just is, and we happen to exist inside of it.
Yeah.
We just happen to be. But if you want to make the argument that the universe is fine-tuned for human life, there's an equal and maybe stronger argument that it's fine-tuned for humans to not exist.
Yeah, think about how much we have to do on a regular basis just to even be baseline healthy.
Yeah.
Right? Like that, it seems like if it were fine-tuned for life, we would have to do a lot less to be healthy.
Not to mention, to go back on the alien thing, if the universe was fine-tuned for life, wouldn't life be more abundant?
Yeah. We have no other life in our solar system, like you'd expect that.
At least that we found.
You know? Yeah.
Got
that we
some
found.
Martians out there.
Yeah, some like water in Mars. Who knows what's under those rocks?
Yeah.
But yeah.
So in the last, or did you have another thing to put on the fine-tuning argument?
No. Yeah, we can go into the experience argument, which I feel like is the most popular amongst at least non academic circles.
So the other ones are way more centered in academia. They try to prove God through logical processes, and I don't mean to sound condescending when I say this, but most people don't view the world through logical consistence. Most people's worldview is predicated on emotion and feeling and experience.
Yeah, most just ideas we hold to be true are fueled by how it makes us feel.
So while, like, if I think you go and talk to a random Christian person or a random Jewish person or a random Muslim person, they're not going to bring out the ontological argument at you. They're not going to bring out fine-tuning.
Yeah.
They're more than likely going to say, I felt him. He spoke to me.
Yeah.
He took me out of a really dark place. I was right on the verge of doing X, Y, Z, and he pulled me out.
Yeah, or like, you know, people have seen unexplainable things. You know, I've noticed in my experience that the claim that unexplained things that happened in the favor of the person is proof of that. And just because we can't explain it, it must be God, because nothing can explain it, they assume.
I mean, to a degree, I understand it. If I was like a parent and my kid's got cancer and randomly his cancer's in recession, I can see whether like this was...
He's looking out for me, yeah.
He's here for us.
Yeah.
I'd say look at the doctors and thank them, but you know.
But yeah, I think it's a knee-jerk reaction. I think most people don't have the tools to explain really good things that seem very complex. Mm-hmm. We don't have the tools to kind of put all of the, you know, moving elements together and make sense of it. So it's easy to just fall back on the idea that there is some great being up there that's watching out for us and has us in his best interest. Right. And we also fall back on the idea that like when something really bad happens, that like, oh, he's testing me right now. Right. Like it's really easy to fall back on that and think that. And it actually can be so motivating too if someone uses that, because it's like, well, this is just a test. Meanwhile, people who don't believe in God, it's like, this is just the universe being indifferent to my existence. And I'm, you know, some random crazy obstacle was just yeeted my way because, you know, cause and effect exists. Yeah. And, you know,
I mean, you and I have recently been joking about the idea, like, should we just be religious? Because existing is hard.
It is hard. It is hard.
And I can 100% see how religion makes existing easier.
Yeah.
it's nice to feel like there's the big fella in the sky, and I don't mean that in an offensive way, but just like there's a guy in the sky looking out for you.
Yeah.
Like I can see how that's comforting in a world that seems so indifferent to me. It's
Yeah.
nice to feel that the one thing that created all of it, he's in my corner.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I would just want to, you know, express to the religious viewers is take all of your experiences with a grain of salt. You know, our brain is very limited. We have senses that are flawed and limited as well. They're constructed in a very hyper specific way where, like, if you heard in the same way that a dog does or a bat does, you know, reality would look and feel very different. You know, and it's subject to mistakes. It's not going to interpret all the data correctly. I mean, our brain is literally just a little sponge ball that's interpreting electrical signals. Like, that thing is going to have errors. So when you hear a thing or see a certain thing, don't always assume it was true.
Right.
You know, have that room of like intellectual honesty with yourself and just be like, hey, I could be wrong. Maybe I misinterpreted something, rather than leaping to the conclusion that, oh, it is true and therefore it also must just be God intervening in my life.
Yeah. I think it's easily just summed up in that subjective experience isn't sufficient to prove something's validity.
Yeah.
It just isn't. Like, even in a court of law, we take eye testimony witness as supporting evidence, but not as damning evidence.
Yeah.
You can't put someone in jail because 3 people saw him do something, right?
Yeah.
You need like empirical evidence. You need DNA. You need a weapon. You need all these different things, because when we're testing the validity of a claim, we need more than this happened to me one time.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that to demean people's experiences. I understand, and I mean, I know people who have been like pulled out of addiction because they fell to God in their words.
Yeah.
And I get it. It's a powerful tool, but I'm sorry, that doesn't prove he's real.
Yeah, I think the most convincing thing here is that they already have dispositions. They already ascribe to a thing. So their brain has been primed to see reality in a way that's in accordance with this set existence. Yeah, it doesn't justify, but it appeals so intensely to emotions, and that's
So
what's
much.
gripping people in these circumstances. Is you have this primed already state of being that is already accustomed to and open to the existence of God, and when, you know, really harsh things or beautiful things happen in your life, your emotions that are at an all-time high, and you're going to take what your brain has been primed with, and it's just going to go together like glue. And you're going to think, and no one can tell you otherwise, that was God, or that was God intervening in some way.
Right.
And yeah, I think that, you know, religion has a way of really playing the strings on our emotions so intensely and coupling it with a sense of comfort and peace that is almost unattainable anywhere else.
Yeah, there's not much things that give you that.
Have the equivalency of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Again, the comfort of having the all-powerful being in your corner, there's nothing that can be more comfortable.
And also that you, like a video game, you're coming back alive. You've got chance 2 happening, and it's also going to be beautiful, and you're going to meet everyone you ever loved and all your friends.
Yeah.
It's comforting. It's comforting in comparison to the pressures someone puts on themselves, that like, this is your one shot at existence. Nothing cares about you. The universe is indifferent, and like, bad stuff's going to happen. You can get cancer. Your family's going to die. Everyone you loved is like going to get hurt.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, it's
Bad
a lot.
things will happen.
Yeah.
That's essentially what you're saying.
Yeah. And,
It's easy to justify those bad things that are inevitably going to happen if you view them as just tests from the all-powerful, so that you can eventually enter his gates, right?
yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it are just, you know, yeah, like you said, testing your faith to him. How many things can I throw your way that, like, are you gonna like say God doesn't exist? Because yeah, a lot of people have experienced, like, you gave my you know, one of my loved ones cancer, and you took my kid from me. Like, you can't exist. How can you exist? Why would you do these things? And some people become non-believers through enough bad things, or you know, some people have really bad things, and then a lot of good things follow, and they're like, oh my God, you must exist. Because
it's again that thing that I said earlier, where observably most people understand reality through an emotional lens,
Yeah.
which lends them to both not believing in him if too many bad things happen, or believing in him if a lot of good things happen. It's it seems to be our default to exist in that emotional state, which is why I personally like the academic arguments more, because I tend to look at the world more through academia and trying to understand rather than just feel it out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think through academia, that is how, we're just getting closer into contact with how science operates. And
Or how the universe operates, science, the tool to understand the
yeah,
universe.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and we need that. We need to fall back on a variety of not only just having other people validate our experiences through collective agreement and acknowledgement and
Yeah.
critique. We need that. It helps to validate our experience.
Yeah, it definitely does. Um, I think that closes out this episode. I
Yeah.
mean, relatively, I think this was a shorter one. This is, like we said at the beginning, just an academic exercise, keeping our uh, brains sharp by testing your ideas. Stress test everything you believe in, because that's how you further cement the thing you believe in.
Yeah.
If you never stress test it, you're never actually believing in it more. The more you understand the fallacies in what you believe, the better you can believe it if you can disprove those fallacies.
Yeah, we got to regularly do that.
Yeah. And you guys will see it. I mean, this came naturally because for the vast majority of my life, I've been arguing these arguments.
Yeah.
Next week is going to be the real test for us, because we're doing the whole litmus test of where our arguments for reality fall short.
Yeah, going against those.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
It will. All right. We'll see you guys there.
Bye.
Bye.